Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. We are waiting for you to join in, and we are happy to welcome you to this webinar on the ways in which adult learning and education need to respond in the face of this pandemic, COVID-19. My name is Rajesh Tandon. I am founder of PRIA. I am former chair of ASPBAE, and I am delighted to co-convene this webinar in partnership with ASPBAE. ASPBAE, you know, is more than 50-year-old association of practitioners and policymakers and supporters of basic and adult education throughout Asia Pacific, South Pacific region. We welcome you to this webinar. We have an excellent set of panelists, and I'm going to introduce them to you in a moment. The webinar, my co-moderator in the webinar is my colleague, Ms. Nandita Bhatt. She is a long-standing colleague at PRIA in Delhi, and now for the last 3 years is providing leadership to Martha Farrell Foundation, focusing on issues of gender justice, preventing violence against women and girls, and especially on prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. So welcome Nandita as my co-moderator. Good morning to you all. Now, because we are operating through various time zones, for some of you it will be good afternoon, and for many of you it will be very early morning perhaps today. Let me introduce my other fellow panelists, and then I will explain to you how we are going to operate this webinar. So I'm going to invite in a moment, when I finish the introduction, Ms. Maria Lourdes Almazan Khan, who is the Secretary General of ASPBAE and is a long-standing colleague of mine. She and I go back to 91, I guess. And we seem to forget how long we have known each other. Welcome, Maria. Maria has been providing an important leadership role to make ASPBAE play a policy advocacy role, not just within our region, but internationally. And at the moment, ASPBAE is one of the strongest regional associations, particularly focusing on SDG 4 and its implications, not only in our region, but globally. Maria happens to be born in Philippines, but that was only happening. I think she has spent more years now in India than in the Philippines. Welcome, Maria. Great to have you this morning with us.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Our next panelist is whom we call affectionately Nani, Zulminarni from Indonesia. Nani is the president of ASPBAE, but more importantly has been very active with the women's organizations in Indonesia and in that region. And Nani has been a part of ASPBAE's leadership group for nearly 15 years now, and has been playing an important role, first and foremost within the country and then within the Asia Pacific region. Welcome, Nani. Welcome.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you.
Our third panelist is Archana Dwivedi. Archana is the director of Nirantar, which is a adult education, women's education organization based here in India. And Nirantar has a long pedigree and history of doing this work, particularly with women and women's literacy, going back to the 80s. And Archana is now providing leadership to the work of Nirantar in India. Welcome, Archana. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Rajesh.
And our fourth panelist is Dr. Uwe Gartenschläger, who is the Vice Director of DBV International. And Uwe, till very recently, was head of the Asia office based in Laos, and has been working in this field now for nearly 3 decades. More importantly, he also is currently the president of European Association for Education of Adults. And for Uwe, it is a little early in the morning. So really good morning to you, Uwe.
Thank you, Rajesh, and thank you for inviting me.
Great. Now, special welcome to DBV colleagues who may have joined from Laos, from Central Asia, from Middle East, and also to all of you who are participating in this webinar. We are all facing this pandemic. It's been about 8 weeks. And when you think of it, in those 8 weeks, our lives have been disrupted. Our institutions have been disrupted. Our communities have been disrupted. And we are seeing visuals in many parts of the world that the impact of the pandemic has not left any corner, has not left any community. Of course, it has affected some people more than others, but it is spread throughout the world. And in that process, we are learning many new ways of behaving. Our leaders have been telling us, our scientists have been telling us that we are supposed to maintain social distance. My guess is what they mean is physical distance, because social distance is actually reduced these days. I'm coming more close to my colleagues and my family members during lockdown period, though I am physically distant from them. We are being told to wash our hands, use soap and water. Sometimes these commodities are not available. Some families don't have space to distance. In fact, the only way they can distance is by going out of the house in public space. But in lockdown, you're not allowed to go out of the house. We are learning to cover our face, variety of ways, designer masks to simple cloth. Few years ago, some people were being stigmatized for covering their face, but now covering your face is the new normal. It's unbelievable. We are being told that we have to stay at home and work from home. Some of us, like all the panelists and perhaps many of you participating in this webinar, we are privileged. We have homes, we have rooms in the homes, we have bandwidth connectivity, and we have technology access which we can afford. Our cost of getting this access is affordable to us. But that is not the case around the world. That is not the case in my country. You may have seen millions of people walking on the streets in this country, migrant workers trying to go home, because the pandemic has caused panic, has given a feeling of being afraid, and it has given misconceptions of what is going to happen. People are not clear that the pandemic cannot be caused through air. You need to come close to somebody, and that too, it can only insert through your nose or mouth or your eyes. It cannot enter any other part of your skin. And in this situation, there are all kinds of solutions, cures, medicines, treatments of doubtful veracity also being promoted. So this is a hot season for rumors, for fake news, for all kinds of quick buck making exercise. Now, in our view, this is the time when those of us who believe in adult learning, who believe in learning as the basis of changing individuals, changing households, changing communities, changing institutions. The core of changing is learning. The messaging in the period of lockdown is coming only on digital platforms. It is coming in a top-down manner. It is coming in the mainstream national language. And all of us as adult educators know that the idiom, the flavor, the story, the visual, and the dialect of that language has to be local for it to be even understood, let alone acted upon. When the lockdown opens, sooner or later, our colleagues in Germany are a bit more fortunate, perhaps some other countries too. We will have to come to terms with helping people understand the meaning of the new normal. But we will also have to ask our policymakers, our educators to think about equity, to think about inclusion. In many countries, in India also, they have promoted online learning for high school students, online learning for university students. Other than middle class private high schools, nobody can do online learning. Neither the teachers, nor the technology, nor the infrastructure, nor the students. Anybody can do online learning. So if you complete a term with online learning, you are leaving behind many more millions than has been the case so far. So all of us in this field have been talking about inclusion, quality inclusion, not just enrollment inclusion, and the quality at this moment of the pandemic is really a challenge. These are the kinds of questions. These are the kinds of questions in matters of learning about health, personal health, public health, community health, kind of learning about how to continue your formal education and how to link that formal education with informal education, non-formal education. I am reminded of the ways in which the practitioners of adult education have always emphasized learning beyond the classroom, learning in the real world, learning through life. So we need to harvest, we need to mobilize all our expertise, all our practitioners, all our knowledge institutions, all our grassroots organizations in order to respond to this new pandemic. And we are looking forward to, therefore, hearing from you all into a question and answer session. Now, the way we will operate is we have 4 panelists. I'm going to invite them one by one. My co-moderator Nandita will help me in doing this. Then we have on your icon, you can have question and answer. You see, if you go to the bar below in the Zoom platform, you have Q&A. You can type in your questions. You can raise your hand if you want to speak. Later on, after the panelists have finished, each panelist will speak about 8 minutes or so. Then we will have question and answer for half an hour, 40 minutes before we end the webinar. So welcome again. And now let me invite the first panelist, Maria, Secretary General of ASPBAE. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you, Rajesh. Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. First, let me thank PRIA and Rajesh for reaching out to ASPBAE to organize this very important discussion around adult learning and education in the period of the COVID-19 pandemic. As Rajesh mentioned in his introduction to me, PRIA has been my first home in India, so there's always an extra layer of delight when I am able to participate in an activity with PRIA. So thank you, PRIA, thank you, Rajesh, and your colleagues for organizing this. There is a PowerPoint that I was hoping can be shared. Is that on? All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jimmy. Well, colleagues, the reflections I will share here are coming out of consultations and discussions we've been having within ASPBAE and within our membership, within the Executive Council, within the staff of ASPBAE, as we've been consulting and touching base, coming to terms with the new realities imposed by this, this crisis. And so my presentation will focus to a large extent on the insights and the information coming out of those consultations. Next slide, please. I suppose it's useful to start with, colleagues, the statistics, which are very alarming in relation to how the crisis has impacted on our lives, our livelihoods, and therefore implications in relation to the challenges for learning. I think those of us, all probably in this webinar who have been tracking the news, know about the information and the data related to how much the virus has affected the health of people worldwide. The World Health Organization talks about 3 million already being infected and about 200,000 of deaths. The World Food Program talks about the great impact as far as food security is concerned, how 265 million are at the brink of starvation and will be so by the end of 2020 because of the pandemic. We know of the news regarding the impact on unemployment, on massive unemployment, and the International Labor Organization estimates that the cutbacks would be equivalent to about 200 million full-time workers in just 3 months. Closer to our sector, UNESCO estimates that about 1.3 billion learners are affected by the school closures, representing about 74% of all enrolled students on account of massive lockdowns in about 186 countries all over the world. Next slide, please. The stories from the field that we've been getting as we've been consulting, especially with our youth partners in our youth engagement strategy, reinforce what these alarming statistics say. They talk about massive food deprivation on account of this crisis, and even when governments and a lot of charity organizations have come to respond to this crisis and to the massive shortages of food, there has been uneven reach of the public distribution systems and a lot of more remote communities, poor communities, people who do not have adequate documentation, which is required for the public, the formal public distribution systems to make food accessible to them or cash transfers available to them for food, have been left behind. So there's great insecurity because of food deprivation. There are, of course, genuine fears for health. I think as Rajesh also mentioned earlier, there's a lack of information. There's a fear about the absence of appropriate medical care and medical facilities in the communities which are poorer, and of course they face even more tension and stress because of rampant fake news related to the COVID-19. There's been a loss of income and livelihoods. Many of the young people that we work with are both studying and working at the same time, and they've been hit by both the loss of income and livelihoods, just as they have been hit by the loss of learning opportunities. And again, echoing what Rajesh had observed in his earlier remarks, the great push of access to continuing education based on online learning options has not been accessible or has not been viable for many of the poor communities because of low internet connectivity. They don't have access to suitable devices. And many of the young people are really feeling frustrated and anxious because they fear that they have no chances of returning back to schools even when the restrictions on mobility are lifted because their primary occupation will then be in restoring livelihoods and in catching up on lost livelihoods and income. Many fear harassment because of extremely overactive agencies enforcing the lockdowns. A lot of human rights groups in many parts of our region have decried how under the cover of pandemic, human rights and democratic spaces have taken a beating. And there have been a rise in crime observed, domestic violence, the rise in alcoholism, which is making many of our young people very insecure and very anxious. Rajesh mentioned about social stigmas attached to certain communities. We hear stories from our members, for example, in Myanmar, that returning migrants from Thailand, and they're coming in droves, coming back to Vietnam, are being stigmatized as virus carriers. And so they face, they're ostracized in their communities, quite apart from, facing the anxiety of lost jobs, etc. Next slide, please. In most countries, in countries where lifelong learning systems are within the priority of public provisioning, where they are fairly more developed, where they are publicly resourced, many of these lifelong learning cities within local governments have responded in a very creative and effective way with adult learning and education tools to combat the crisis. Even in countries like China, which has been hard hit by the crisis, at one point it was the epicenter of the pandemic, because they have very well developed systems of having the SARS pandemic as an experience where they faced lockdowns and school closures, not to the extent that they experience now, but they've had that base to fall back on. They've been able to respond in a far more efficient way in terms of the pandemic, in terms of their ability to make online systems more accessible to their populations, to their students, how community learning associations have been at the front line of health education, of helping the more vulnerable in communities, in organizing communities as well as volunteers to help with these vulnerable groups, especially the elderly, especially those with special disability, with special needs, and those with other disabilities. This infrastructure has been able to respond in a big way. For most of us and those in the developing world, in developing countries in our region, a lot has fallen on the laps of civil society organizations and NGOs in terms of community-based responses to the crisis. And I think one message here is that we have stepped up. ASPBAE members have certainly responded in very creative and brave ways in responding. Now, these are just a few of the menu of responses that our members have undertaken, and I think you will hear more details from Nani in her presentation about what her organization PECA has done, and likewise from Archana in relation to Nirantar. But ASPBAE members have been involved in health education, in about information regarding the crisis, about battling fake news. They have been channels for information dissemination on how governments are responding, how people have to react to the crisis, and how to protect themselves, and also in relation to government schemes and how they could access this. Those who have been in the business of livelihoods training in the first place have scaled up their activities in relation to online livelihood trainings and tutorials to reach out to more groups. And those in our membership who have been very active in advocacy work have also been continuing to engage with governments, especially those who are now grappling with the impacts of school closures and what are alternative continuing education options, so that there is a more equitable set of options available, especially for poorer communities, away from a focus solely on internet-based solutions, because as mentioned earlier, that is not available to many of the poorer families. While we have said that NGOs, as again, have stepped up in terms of the response to the crisis, I think what bears noting is that we should not surrender our demand that governments be held accountable and take further responsibility in terms of adult learning and education provisioning, and that they have to step up because the crisis demands the scale of ill responses that governments are supposed to deliver. And in the bleakness of what we face now, we find that there are some opportunities for arguing or making a greater case for policy priority and investment in adult learning and education in what we are experiencing now. We find that there is now greater policy appreciation for flexible learning, where policymakers are now embracing the notion that education systems should provide for both non-formal, informal, and formal learning, and that this should be valued, they should be invested in, and they should be encouraged. We have been crying to the rafters about how this is essential, because this is also what would be important for ensuring that there are opportunities for ongoing learners to among adults to continue learning, and to frame opportunities for learning within the concrete and diverse realities of learners. Because of the COVID pandemic, there is now a greater appreciation of this, and while this debate has been in the margins, it has now been catapulted to the center of policy discussions and consideration. And this, we think, will bode well for adult learning and education in the longer term. There is also now a greater policy appreciation for intergenerational learning, as the responsibility for teaching in schools and by teachers has now transferred to households by parents. There is now suddenly policymakers are beginning to understand what we have been saying all along, that there should be capacity building and learning responses as well to the learning needs of parents. And that intergenerational learning is important for parents, for communities, and for children's learning as well. I think the caution here that we should be mindful of is that for poorer families, it's all very well to say continue learning, and for family members and parents in particular to take on some of these teaching responsibilities. But in poor households, especially the mother or the elder sibling, they are already experiencing so many heavy burdens of caring for the family, putting food on the table, of extra livelihood activities to support the family. And so it's a little unrealistic, perhaps a little unfair, if that extra load of teaching is in the longer term put on the lap of parents and poorer families. But there is a case on their own to make an argument for continued education for parents as well, and to address to their learning needs. We anticipate that there will be a greater emphasis on skills for work in the future. It's already a priority of governments, but this will be further reinforced with massive unemployment, with the return of migrant workers needing reskilling, retooling. But I think the caution here, while this is important and appropriate, is that this should not be at the trade-off of making sure there are opportunities as well to develop life skills so that workers, people, citizens are also developed in their capacities to be empowered individuals, critically thinking, able to engage in policies which affect their lives and are socially aware. And finally, I think the thing to say is whether we want it or not, the push for online learning is there to stay. It will be like living in another planet. If we think we can wish it away, we cannot. I think the challenge for us is how to meet this push for online learning with measures that will ensure equity, with measures that will ensure inclusion and quality, and also to perhaps diversify the options for distance education, to also consider the development of other distance learning opportunities which are more accessible, such as TV, radio, and the like. And I think finally to say that we should caution against in this drive, the corporate capture of distance learning technologies and transfers and technologies and platforms, because this would most certainly only expand further the digital divide and greater privatization and commercialization of learning and education, moving it out of the reach of poor families. So I think with those comments, I'll end my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. Excellent. You gave a good overview of the region as well as the challenges that are emerging in face of all of us as adult educators. Let me now invite Nani from Indonesia.
Thank you, Rajesh, and thank you, Maria, for put this the landscape of this pandemic and how it's affect our lifelong learning process. So I would like to focus my presentation into the what kind of learning that we reflect in the field, which need to be what you call it, to be continued and to be strengthened in the future if this we have new normal life after this pandemic. So can I have my PowerPoint? I have very short PowerPoint with the pictures. This is based. This is actually to sharpen what Maria has presented in terms of what change happened in the life of people in most of the region. And I want to focus on the case of Peka, where the community of women-headed family, the poor community, how they cope with this situation. So I will look at from the learning framework that we usually use in ASPBAE. First, what the community learn to know about this COVID. The next slide, please. First things, we in Indonesia, particularly on the mid of March, the government admit and announced that we have this pandemic in the country. And on the March 13th, then the social distancing policy is implemented. But since then, and Jakarta as the capital become the epicentrum of this pandemic with the first and the second case identified by that time. But because of the social distancing policy, the other part of Indonesia get affected. First, because especially do not understand about this, what is this COVID things, and why we have to have this social distancing and how we should do it, and then who will be get affected. Because there are a lot of, as Maria already said before, there are a lot of hoax, a lot of misinformation, including from the government themselves. For several weeks before the policy, government always ignored and said, "Oh, we will be fine. This type of disease will not affect us because we are in the tropical countries and it will be just cured by themselves." And this kind of information is very damaging. Then we need to do a lot of education, a lot of information, awareness raising, how dangerous these small creatures is actually, and how people get protected to protect themselves in this kind of situation. So learn to know what is that and how their life will change dramatically because of this. Next slide, please. And then, because of the change on, because of the policy of social distancing and several local government also implement the policy, people have to lock down, cannot. First, of course, when the school, first policy affects school, children have to study at home. And a lot of people who work in informal sectors, they have to close down their business, who depend on daily activities, then cannot really earn by that time. So they have to learn how to do their livelihood. First, how to survive, how to do different type of livelihood when they are not allowed to go, or when their their main of businesses is locked down. Like for example, some people sell things on the street, in the school. Now there is no customers because people are not supposed to go out. So the non-traditional livelihood, this is what Mino is here, so we always talk about this, how to then switch, how to quickly change the perception of poor people, that they should find other ways of the livelihood which traditionally they do. And that's the first one. The second one, how they have to learn how to become mentors, teachers for the children who have studied at home. You know, using this long distance and virtual learning. While some of these poor women actually do not even finish their elementary school. So it's really challenging. They don't have sufficient mobile, for example, and no quota for their internet connection. So all this become some things that we need to accompanying. We need to have conversation with the women how they deal with this. Otherwise, they will get frustrated. So this is the second challenge, the learning that have been missed for a long time, how to deal with this kind of sudden crisis. Next slide. And the third reflection is how we can facilitate, organize the community, learn to be a survivor in this. This is related with mental health. You know, people get frustrated because, you know, when they lost the daily income, they stuck at home and they have to face the children crying, fighting, and also have to asking questions and things. And also, you know, the expenses increasing, not only double, triple because of staple food, main food, but also for this quota, for communication and those kind of things. And then also they are worried whether if they get out, they will get infected on this kind of virus. So learn how to be a survivor and learn how to be how to be organizers at the same time without jeopardizing their own life. So this is huge process that we have to accompany the women from long distance, from us as well. The biggest challenge, we cannot face-to-face meet them. It's only by phone, and then also hearing them crying, hearing them, you know, worry, but we feel helpless, we cannot do anything. So we also at the same time have to process our mental health in this kind of situation. Next slide, please. And then, of course, the other reflection is it's huge process of learning to live together, to share, to care in this situation. There are a lot of, I think what is good things come out from this pandemic in Indonesia is there are a lot, before government respond directly to this massive impact to the poor people, a lot of initiative coming from civil society, from individual, from organization to support the poor people. So then how we organize the community who are also affected and in the very difficult situation to organize, to share, and to care with others, and to look at their 5 neighbors on the right, 5 neighbors on the left, 5 neighbors on the front, or 5 neighbors on the back, how they're doing, and then organize the donation from other people to this. So this is the also a learning part. So, and also how then to also organize and respond to the government policy regarding with the social protection, for example. So this is part of this, how they live together in this situation, but still engage with the whole bigger system. The last slide yeah, and also protection. And this is also how to learn to live together to protect each other. For example, the Pakha women produce mask face and disinfectant and all those things and distribute to poor people, to other people, so they can get protected. Raining in my part, I hope it won't be so annoying. Last slide. And then I think the last one is really to prepare the community how to learn to rebuild new normal life system. I don't think we have to go back to the normal life before the pandemic. This is the golden opportunity, and we have a windows of opportunity which we shouldn't miss to really transform our life to the new normal. More equality, the social justice framework. I want to, my last slide is this picture. I like this picture. I found it in the internet. The last slide, please. Yes, this one. So how can we really make social justice a reality? By taking out all the barrier of community to learn, to be part, equally be part, enjoy the change, enjoy the resources, enjoy the opportunity, and to really build the new normal, better life for all with the process of lifelong learning. How really this framework of life learning be part of the process. The policy, as Maria already mentioned, there are a lot of government now really aha moment for the government that the issues that we have been raised for a long time now find the momentos that we can just tell them, see, I told you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nani, for that. I think redefining the new normal, that was a key takeaway from what you presented. I would like to now invite Archana. Archana is a director at Nirantar. Nirantar has been doing some exceptional work with literacy and women's education and gender for the more than 2 decades, I think. So Archana, welcome.
Thank you, Nandita. And I will base my sharing on the work that Nirantar is doing in the COVID times, and also the challenges that we are facing. I would also start, I think Rajesh ji has already given a good background of the situation in India, because reverse migration was a big problem, but I think everyone was caught unaware. Nobody was expecting that the lockdown will continue for such a long time. So after first wave, when the second wave of lockdown happened, the panic levels were way higher than the first wave of lockdown. When first wave of lockdown happened, our very obvious response was to start doing the community mapping. And that happens because Nirantar is already women in rural areas and young girls in urban slums and resettlement colonies. And digital literacy has been an area of intervention where we've been trying to build capacities of women and girls how to use digital mediums. These girls and women just took leadership and started doing the community mapping to understand what are the margin, or what are the kind of problems that their neighbors were facing. It was a very small initiative where some women and girls started sending pictures and informations because they knew how to handle, how to make videos, how to take pictures, how to use internet. And slowly, as it started gathering momentum, we realized that the problem was much more higher than we had thought. These women and girls also needed support, not only in terms of technology and digital skills, but also because a lot of women and girls don't have access to phones itself. Hardware is also a big problem. because if there is a phone in the family, then it's the man of the house who has the access. So when girls and women started using the phones of their brothers or husbands more than required, not just for personal, but actually sending information, connecting to administration, there were huge backlashes, even on the women and girls within the volunteers also. People started asking, what are you doing when we ourselves are stressed? Like, why are you going out and trying to do things that you're not supposed to be doing? Because these are the things that women were taking leadership and doing volunteering. There was no force, but this is how I think the education that empowers women, education that enables women, women also start taking leadership on their own and started coming in these roles. With that, we also realized that a lot of government related services and entitlements were all online. They had to fill forms to access ration or PDS or even money that was transferred, and most of the people in community were not able to fill those forms. So these we mobilized a lot of girls and women to start filling forms, and all of this was happening online. Form filling itself was such a huge this thing, because they don't have unlimited access to internet also, and it needed them to be online, filling like 500 forms, 1000 forms for all the families in their neighborhood. So we started mobilizing fellowship for these women and girls to provide them phone support, at least this kind of a service support where they could take connections and do this kind of work. So rights and entitlements has again become a very, the access to rights and entitlements is also now very different than what it was earlier. Since it is all online, so again, community which has learned to negotiate with system to access it, it's back to square one. They again need somebody to mediate it, because they don't know how to fill forms. And I think digital literacy becomes so important in this kind of thing. I think another thing that we also experienced a lot is fear and anxiety amongst community. I think you've already mentioned that there was a lot of misinformation and scare because of the kind of information that was being spread, and there was no way for people to really screen what is right information and what is wrong information. And this is how people respond when you don't have information, and all kinds of things are coming to them, so they started believing in everything. We had cases where people were running from house to house. Corona positive men were running house to house to not go to hospital for testing. And how then, women came together, talked to the panchayat person, counseled him that at least go to the doctor, get yourself tested. I know it's this kind of scare, just out of scare, he will not go. So then we decided to make some podcast where we, and that too in a local language, because when information goes from a government source in a very official form, they think that it is for somebody else. I mean, it doesn't relate to them. So we made podcast in their local language, explaining them everything. There's nothing to be scared, and then started disseminating it. Our women leaders in the community started making personal phone calls to each woman in the community saying, this is the right information, you know me, I have got this information from reliable sources, so that there was some source where they can talk back. It was not like just one way in which information was given and they had nobody to ask questions or ask for clarifications. So these podcasts and these phone calls made a whole lot of difference. We also started reaching out to our own teachers and volunteers that what they were facing, and it was so important how these teachers were, one, overwhelmed by the fact that they are also being asked, and they are also online, and they can be on Zoom and talk to like 50 people. It not only gave them confidence, it also gave them a sense that they are still relevant. A lot of them were facing a lot of anxiety in terms of whether we are required anymore or not, because literacy centers are not running, there's no work going on. So plus not being connected, and these women had a huge struggle to come out and become teachers. Now to go back to families again and become the same woman who they were 5 years back, 10 years back, was again a very, very traumatic experience for them to become a full-time housewife and have nothing to do with this. So we started also working with these teachers and created material for women learners, for girls, never enrolled and dropout girls that we are working with. And it was so interesting when we started creating content. The first feedback that we got from teachers on the content is, Didi, make this carefully, because most of these women are accessing this content on their brothers or husbands' mobile phones. So don't write anything which will agitate them. So a lot of our content from gender perspective, we had to, package it rightly so that it doesn't create more tensions and stress in the family, which women were already facing. So I think these are the kind of things that we have tried, and this is what we have managed to work, because there was this technology available, and women and girls were being trained in using this technology. However, if I talk of the challenges, I think the biggest challenge at the moment is that a lot of our material, because most of us have experience of working offline, and the content is also all in the print form. So how do we now convert this material which is in print form into a digital form? And I think it is not just making videos or audios out of the present content. It needs a lot of creative thinking, that how do we repurpose this material so that it continues to be relevant, contextual, because I think we use feminist pedagogy, we use the knowledge and the context of learner to build this material. Now in this online world, when we are most of the time doing one-way communication, how do we use certain pedagogies so that the learner is also part of that entire process, and not just consuming the information. So I think that's a big challenge as an organization who's trying to reinvent and re-look at this learning processes for women and girls in remote areas or in urban marginalized communities. Another challenge I feel, especially when we are working with young girls in different communities, is that this community of girls is very different than the community of women that we were working with. And if I can give a short example, is like a lot of young people are consuming TikTok sort of a material, like 1 minute thing. So even when we were making podcast, the maximum length of a podcast was not more than 5 or 6 minutes. We were so scared whether people will listen for more than 5 minutes or not, so that's like a big challenge. So how do you, so this new audience, how do we keep them engaged in a way so that it is not boring and it keeps the attention span as well? So this is something which we are also continuously trying to learn and create material in. Another big challenge is that, and again, we are trying something, and let's see how much it works, is that how do we bring women and girls' lived realities into the content that we are producing? Just being on phone lines or just being providing content is not giving us the live experience of the way we are used to working in communities and engaging and, you know, live with them, live their reality, and then sort of content creation. So a lot of girls on their own, and I think that also gave us idea how to go about it, started recording their own stories. So they didn't want to write. So what they did, they started recording, Didi, we did this today, this has happened. Some started sending videos, and that gave us idea that why not ask girls to just talk about themselves or talk about what is happening in their vicinity, and then how can we learn from that. And I think that also became a huge thing for us to know the real situation on the ground. Because, for example, something which is very, very new for us to know was that we know who are the most marginalized in the community, and we were easily able to reach out because girls and women had mapped them. But when they actually started talking and recording their own voices, they also shared that, Didi, there were a lot of families which are so-called not so poor families, but out of shame, they will not share that they are suffering. They have gone hungry for 2 days, but they will not come out and say that they are as marginalized as the other family who's like identified marginalized family. So this was a new thing for us, that even these are the realities, and this happened only when girls started sharing, just like not a formal data, but informally recording everything that was coming to them and they wanted to share. So these are, but I guess we'll also have to find newer ways of connecting with the community and knowing the realities in which communities are living and facing. And how do we build that understanding and knowledge into the content that we are creating now for the digital platforms. And I think the last point that I would like to share is, and this I have also faced as a challenge even when I'm attending webinars or even when we are talking, how do we make these platforms interactive? Even when there are online classes, even when we are sending out content, producing stories, podcasts, from gender perspective, reaching out to women, it is still a very one-way thing. They hear, maybe after 2 or 3 days, we will do a follow-up call and ask, okay, did you hear that story? What do you think? It is still, still doesn't give like you hear and you respond and you are able to discuss. So what are the alternatives in which we can create the similar kind of learning spaces and learning experiences where we all can collectively discuss, talk, or I don't know, maybe we all get used to this kind of a mode, but at the moment, that is the thing we are facing, and that's what, you know, even women and girls are sort of craving for, that, you know, when are we going to come together? When are we going to have the same kind of fun space where we can just say anything, everything? Because you know, creating safe spaces for women and girls, because learning space is also a safe space the way we create for women. Home is not that kind of space where they can talk everything, they can say everything, especially in cases of you know, mental health issues, violence, things that they are facing. They don't get that kind of space within their family. So I think that is still a big challenge for us to find out that how do we create that kind of safe learning space for women and girls, even when all of this is going to happen online. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Archana. So relevant and really to the point, whatever you have shared. I just, before I invite Uwe, I just wanted to share a little bit about what we are doing also, and the kind of challenges we are facing. Very, very similar challenges. You know, we work with domestic workers in the NCR region, and you know, the misconception and the fear was also there. And as we all know, domestic workers are the sole earning members of their family as well. So the pressure on food also and providing for the family is huge. So so when the messaging is that rations will be distributed, but your ration card is not from here, and then also the messaging about physical distance, stay home, stay safe. So all these kind of messaging was creating a lot of fear, a lot of misconceptions. What's going to happen? Where do I go? Salaries are not coming through. Domestic violence is increasing. Where do you call? You call 100. The policeman calls the phone number back, but the phone is not hers. It is owned by the husband. So the violence then increases. So these are some of the issues we are also grappling with. So just to share with you, what we did was, since we've been working with domestic workers, so what they have been doing is they have been identifying pockets of where domestic workers live, where no essential services have reached at all. And then also to understand when you call a helpline, what happens, which helpline should you call, one which is civil society or the one with the police. What is the police going to say? What do you tell the police? So this sort of messaging has also been going out. So we've been getting a lot of phone calls from domestic workers saying that yahan pe is community mein खाना बिल्कुल नहीं पहुंचा है. So on their own they've the numbers, all the hunger numbers have also been food helpline numbers have also been given to them. We're also calling up now how much of district collectors. So we have collated numbers of all the district collectors in the entire country. We can actually share it with all of you as well. So those numbers are with everybody to say this person's duty, right? So we talk about sexual harassment at workplace. We are also thinking about live-in domestic workers right now. What is the condition when there is food shortage, when there is this whole what is going on there? Are local committees sleeping? So these are some of the questions now women have started asking, also domestic workers are asking. So just to share with you what we've been doing. And I would like to invite Uwe. So I remember many years ago, we had done some work with elected women representatives in Haryana, the women's political empowerment leadership, and we tried to convert all of that into digital. So that time we had CDs. And so we had packaged them into CDs. It was with support, DVV support, and then we had trained some elected representatives, given them CDs, and they were going forward, conducting those trainings. So that was also an interesting phase. So Uwe, please, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Nandita, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit insights about the situation in Europe. So first of all, I would like to say this is what I can share at the moment. The situation is very flexible and fluent and is changing all time, and what is true today is not necessarily true next week. And secondly, I mean, whatever you are invited to take on board, because the realities of our regions are quite different. So what I can share with you is only my insights in the last 8 weeks. Mainly as working as a president of the European Association. We did a survey among our membership, and by accident we had a virtual meeting with the German EAA members last Friday, and mainly what I would like to share with you is based on this. I have no PowerPoint, but maybe I have some points. I hope so. So my first point is about digitalization. Whenever it comes here about discussing ALE, it is about digitalization, and we cannot avoid it. And my personal opinion, we don't need to avoid it. We just have to be smart and wise on how to cope with digitalization. So there are, of course, several challenges. And just to name a few, there is a lack of hardware, both with the providers and with the participants. This is true in Europe, even in Europe. Not to the same extent, but it is a reality that none the providers and many of the participants, especially from marginalized groups in Europe, a lot from elderly people, are lacking the hardware. The second and equally challenging point is that the trainers and the staff of the providers are lacking the competences of using the hardware, of using digital resources. And this is turned out especially a problem in selecting the correct software. And what Archana, I think, mentioned is on pedagogics. I think this is a lesson learned from this crisis, that all of us, we neglected the challenge that the digital learning needs different kind of didactics and pedagogics, and they are totally underdeveloped in adult learning and education. I mean, we are now learning every day, and this kind of Zoom meetings and other kind of forms of digital exchange and learning are just the beginning. But I agree with what was said, especially by Archana, that this is not really adequate to digital learning. We have to improve. And when you see, when you recognize how some of the commercial providers use digital learning, they are way ahead. The higher education sector is way ahead. So we have to use these digital tools and be quite fast in adopting them to our needs and to the needs of our learners. It is not a question of using them or not. I repeat, we should use them, but we should use them in a way which is attractive and which supports learning by our target groups. And there is a technical issue as well. I mean, in the European countries, much of the funding of adult learning and education is from public sources. The public sector is not prepared to digital learning as well. So how are the funding schemes for online learning and digital learning is neither developed on the national level nor on the European level. So all of our ministries of education and the European Commission are struggling on how to refund for digital learning activities. So this learning on digitalization of education is also a very quick ongoing process at the moment. We have to be fair and to say that on the European level and in many countries, national governments are quite flexible at the moment, but this is more like an ad hoc solution. As a learning from the crisis, as Nani mentioned, that we should learn a lot, and there won't be the same situation after the crisis than before the crisis. We have to develop also some advocacy points on what do we want on funding digital learning. How do we see the schemes of funding digital learning? Because it is different from face-to-face learning. The second point, the first was digitalization. The second is about sustainability. What I mean is the sustainability of our sector. What we can see now and what is expected even in very wealthy countries like Switzerland is that especially small and medium-sized providers, especially civic society providers, will not survive the crisis. Unfortunately, the one impact of the crisis could be that in the ALT sector, there will be a concentration on big, powerful, resource-rich providers. And we should fight this tendency, of course, because, I mean, we are the voice of the civil society. We are convinced that small local providers are at the heart of ALT. What easily could be the impact of the crisis, but that these providers will have to close, and that only the bigger ones who have the resources to digitalization, who can survive without public funding for a longer time, that these ones will survive. It is a critical situation for freelance trainers. I think we are the only sector in the education which is mainly based on voluntary and freelance training staff. So school teachers, universities, even TVET schools, they get their salary at least. But our freelance trainers, they are in a very critical situation, and there are only a very, very few countries where there are schemes to support them. So we might even lose many of our most qualified trainers because they have to earn their livelihood in other sectors. And unfortunately, what we can see as well is there is a very unequal situation in Europe, where we can say that in the northern part, in the center, it is more or less sustainable. The south and the east of Europe are struggling a lot. Just one word about the situation in Germany. What we can see in the crisis now is that we have a decent health system, but a very bad education system. So we can see that the schools are not prepared for digital learning, that the universities are hardly prepared for digital learning, and that parents, it was mentioned already, should play the role of teachers in many cases, which is very challenging for mothers especially, but for many parents in general. My third point would be about outreach. I think we have a challenge that the outreach to specific target groups is more difficult, and we are in danger to lose some of the target groups for adult learning and education. I mentioned already the elderly. Another target group are the migrants. We have a huge migrant issue, and many of these migrants, they have smartphones, but they don't know the language well enough to participate in all of these learning opportunities. They need this face-to-face opportunities and consultation and guidance, which is difficult to deliver in this situation. And we have because of this lockdown, this is very much what was reported from India as well, this psychosocial crisis with domestic violence and people getting crazy and violent in this lockdown situation. Let me finish with three more general remarks. The first one is what we can see on the political area, a very frightening renationalization of politics. Europe is not a category in this crisis. It is about each country itself. And the first reaction of governments is to close the borders. And this is very sad and frightening to see. And it destroys links which have been built for decades. Yesterday I saw a piece about the German-French border, where we were very proud about the friendship with France built in the last 50 years, and now it is totally closed and there is no solidarity across border. And this comes from governments, but unfortunately comes from the people itself. So we have to think about renationalization and what does this mean for us and what can we do against this. The other thing on the political level, especially on the European level, is that politics are based on informal advocacy, on informal meetings, not on the official conferences, official head of states meeting. So what our office in Brussels reports, that advocacy is very challenging, nearly to impossible at the moment, because it is mostly based on meeting by a cup of coffee and discuss with somebody from the Commission, somebody from a member state, and all this is not possible at the moment. So how can we get our messages through? My second point is about what I think all of you mentioned about fake news and people trust the wrong persons. Curious enough and astonishing enough, we have a different situation here. I think this is the first time when people really believe scientists. This fear and panic here has a result that, okay, scientists we can believe and we should believe. And maybe this is one issue why we are comparatively mild casualties, have a mild number of casualties in this crisis. But it brings me to the point, how can we ensure that people start believing scientists in other questions as well? Let's take the climate change. I mean, it is astonishing that people believe in scientists on COVID-19, but not on the impact of climate change. So why is this happening, and what can AL do to change this situation? And my last remark is about the windows of opportunity regarding and the work skills. In the public debate here, there is a huge topic on that we have to revise our view on which work is more important and which kind of work should be paid better. Do we need more investment bankers? Do we need more, I don't know, car manufacturers? Or is it better to have nurses and health workers and education workers? So there is a quite sensible, and you can feel it in the private and in the public, there is a debate on what is important and what is not important. And maybe we can capitalize on this for the future as well. So this was my intervention. So hopefully we have a few minutes for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Uwe. Thank you very much. Very thoughtful comments by all of our panelists. I would request the panelists to read the question and answers icon. There are a few direct questions. Several people of you wanted to know if the presentations will be shared. If all the presentation will be mailed to everybody who has registered, even if they are not on the platform right now. We will also produce a short report. There is a video recording of this. All this will be made available in a few days, 2-3 days, so that everybody has access. I know there is uneven connectivity and not everybody can understand or listen in the same way. But thank you very much. Now, are there people on the platform who want to add something? I know that we have colleagues from DVV and ASPBAE members from other parts of the, other than those represented by the panelists. We have people from, Laos. We have people from Central Asia, from Egypt. We have, I have seen quickly the list. We have people from Japan. So are any one of you want to make a comment? I also saw Lalita Ramdas. If you want to make a comment, there is a system you can raise your hand digitally and we can invite you. Lolly has raised her hand. Other people who want to raise their hand? Okay, well, Lolly, can we invite you? Lalita Ramdas. Lalita Ramdas is one of the long-standing adult educators, nationally, internationally, was president of International Council for Adult Education, has been an elderly statesperson for all of us here. Lolly, can I invite you to make a short comment, please?
Thank you, Rajesh, and thank all of you for having organized this, because I think it's very, very important, very essential. I know that time is short, so I'm going to make just a couple of observations, and I'm hoping very much that maybe this event can be followed up by another one where we will talk much more about practical solution-based sharings from, I think, large numbers who are obviously interested, who are gathered here, and who really would like to see how to put this to use. So there were 2 or 3 points that I have. I had also put down some questions, but I think I'm just going to send them, and maybe they can be shared later. I've already sent it to Priya. But one of my observations and reactions is to thank Uwe particularly for having raised the question of nationalization and renationalization. I think a number of us have been very concerned about the growth of very unhealthy, sort of a discriminatory communal positions, which unfortunately have also been aided by media and different kinds of leadership. And I think that part of what adult educators need to do in our content is to consciously and regularly and continuously address this, to challenge this, to talk to people, to really dissuade them from the kind of, as I said, the false news and also the very disruptive negative news that they are subjected to. Second point, and I live in a village And I guess we are, as always, amongst the privileged who still have had access to broadband. This is what helps me to have been online for the last hour and a bit. But even here, every now and then I would get a message saying my internet is unstable. For those who are actually living out in many of our local areas, they do not have this kind of access. So I think if we are talking about a future where we are going to depend much more on using digitalization and digital education, clearly we need to be addressing the question of infrastructure development. This has to be partly the state who must be able to put these in place. But I think that the advocacy of groups such as ours to insist that this be done so that the demands of equity, access, outreach can be met is something that we will need to constantly, emphasize with our leaders. Last point, I think there's a lot of excellent work on the ground that is going on. One of the things we need to really do is to be able to collect a lot of that kind of data, information, actual praxis. And I was hoping that a small group working in Telangana and out of Hyderabad would be able to join us today, but unfortunately they couldn't. But what excited me tremendously, it's a group I've been associated with, and we really said we need to go back to the roots of popular education as we've all kind of, emerged from that background. But they trained for the last 1 year, long before COVID, youth leaders who came from the most marginalized sections. And it were these youth leaders who are now spread out in a number of villages who, from their smartphones or whatever phones they have, were able to actually meet, talk, discuss, plan, strategize during this COVID epidemic. I will make available to you, and I'll send this to Rajesh and Maria, and maybe you can share these, but simple posters, for instance, where they've talked about discrimination, where they've talked about the health challenges, where they've talked about interaction with the local ration store people, the collectorate, the panchayats, the sarpanches, which are basically your local sources from whom you're going to be able to get whatever assistance you can. And the basic message, for instance, in one of these posters, now translated into about 10 different languages, no to discrimination on caste, class, race, religion, ethnicity, gender, age, region, or any form of stigma and practice. Let us fight COVID-19 together. And this has gone out, it's become, I think, pretty viral and very successful. So I'm hoping that some of these is what we will be able to do going forward. I won't take much of your time, but it's been great reconnecting with a lot of old friends. And well, I look forward to more of the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Lolly. We have some also old friends and some former presidents of ASPBAE here. May I invite Sandy Morrison from New Zealand. Sandy, are you there? Would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes, I am here, Rajesh, and greetings to all our friends from all over the world. Just because, again, I know that our time is very short, one of the issues that we've had here in the South Pacific, particularly in three nations of Vanuatu, Tonga and PNG, is as they're starting very slowly to get familiar with COVID-19 and what they brings, then Cyclone Harold arrives. So all the processes and preparation kind of got very muddled when you're dealing with double crises. And I think that as we go forward, we can't just think about one crisis on its own, but we actually have to be prepared for multi-crises all happening at the same time. So that's one. Certainly in our context and here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, it's been the leadership that has really driven a very inclusive process going forward, and that's been based on values. And I must say also that has been the inclusion of Indigenous values to take us forward. One of the words that we're hearing a lot, particularly from law enforcement, is educate. Everyone must be educated, which again underscores the principle of adult education. And I guess the third point that I want to make is this whole issue around global governance. I mean, right in the middle of the pandemic, people are just, well, when I say people, well, one in particular, but there's been all this critique of who, and if we're reliant on a very solid global infrastructure to help us give data and information and bring us together, who would have thought that there would be a challenge right in the middle of a pandemic? So there's a lot of work still that has to be done within our countries to ensure that there is a solid governance structure as well. So those are just 3 points that I wanted to add into the discussion, and thanks for the time, and really enjoyed all of the interventions that I've heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. We are marveling your Prime Minister when she comes and speaks, and declares COVID-free country. Women's leadership, my God, amazing. We sometimes wish we can import leaders, Merkel from Germany and Andrea from New Zealand, and there are many others. I also see that Robbie Guevara is from Australia, is around. Robbie, would you like to, former president of ASPBAE? It's a collection of former presidents. Delighted to have all of you together at this point.
Rajesh, Robbie is now the current president of ICAE. He's
the new president.
Oh, he's the new president of ICAE. Oh, yes. Wonderful, wonderful. Great.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Robbie. Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, I formally started last night. It's less than 24 hours. So thanks to the greetings from the colleagues, and it's nice to be with the family again. I acknowledge again all the the presidents and the leaders who have gone ahead of me, Rajesh and Sandy in terms of ASPBAE, but also, and then now having Lalita in the room also in terms of ICAE. So, but I, thank you for the opportunity to listen and share. I think I acknowledge the excellent presentations and sharing of experiences. And it has reminded me of my own journey as an adult educator. And I think we need to recall as community educators, I remember early on, and Maria would remember this, the most innovative thing was chalk talk. In community, you had a little blackboard and little chalk, and that was really engaging already, but it was still a one-way pedagogy. But at the heart of adult learning is the recognition, I think, is that it's not the technology that decides how we do things, it's the recognition that our learners themselves have knowledge and experience to share. And so as Chamber says, it's about sharing the stick or sharing the chalk. So in this way now, I think you're raising the correct question. How do we share the technology with our learners? But I think as Archana has clearly said, you discovered that, the technology is there, and it's your learners themselves who are already talking on the ground with the other learners. And it's them that's giving feedback to you. I think it is us who have been separated, and I talk from my own experience now, separated from our learners, but the learners are continuing to have conversations. So how do we reach out to them using the technology as a tool, and using the technology in times of social and physical distancing? And so I think, and it's good to recognize that, as Loli and Nani and Archana have clearly said, and Uwe, is that we are reaping the outcomes of the groundwork that we have been doing for many years in terms of building the capacities of our communities. It is just that we never expected to have such a concentrated challenge like that COVID has faced. But at the same time, it's really, I would say, not thankful, but also that it's global. But at the same time, while it's global, it's not, as Uwe highlighted, it's not homogeneous. We are not all affected in the same way, but we are all affected. And so I think in terms of the question around the pedagogy, as people would know for colleagues, I really enjoy it. You know, interactive learning. I really enjoy how, you know, active learning, and I myself have been quarantined. I would be teaching on a Monday night, 3 hours with my university students here in Australia, but now I just have a flat screen to work with them. And so I think what I've done is to try to reverse again, how do I use the flat screen? It does require preparing our learners to learn differently. Okay, but also I think just keep at the heart of it the commitment to engaging, and the technology should, you know, we need to learn more about the technology. We need to learn how to use it more effectively, but at the same time there are simple ways. And for example, even in Zoom you have a whiteboard. You can use the whiteboard, give the whiteboard, give the capacity for the participants to engage in the whiteboard, and you'd be surprised how they would just grab hold of the opportunity. So it goes back to this whole idea of sharing the chalk. And so I think let's not be overwhelmed. Let us stay committed to the cause, but also stay committed to our commitment that, you know, the pedagogy, at the heart of the pedagogy is that, and as Archana said, it's keeping the dialogue, keeping the conversation going. And the digital platform is the tool, and we need to be able to learn better in terms of making sure that the tool is not just the technology, but as Maria said, it's also democratized, because otherwise then it'll become more expensive to learn if that becomes the major tool. So again, thank you, and I really appreciate the chance to be able to speak to everybody this afternoon.
Thank you, Robbie, and congratulations. I didn't realize it happened last night. Oh, well done, well done. Great to hear your voice. Stay well. Any of you as panelists want to say anything quickly before we have run out of time a little bit? But
yes, Rajesh.
Yes.
More, I think I would like to respond to Minu's question in the question and answer about the. I think she's raising the issues of the new skills. Of course, the online training, digital skill, that's one. But any other things that we are thinking for the future of work skills. So what we are in Indonesia now, there is a trend also to push back to the very basic skills of farming system, and also the indigenous skill that has been left out for a long time in dealing with the nature, for example. So now people try to bring it back as part, since we cannot move so far. Then in the community, where the community locked down in one particular community, they can still actually learn so much in taking back the knowledge, the community-based knowledge and the indigenous knowledge, which really very useful, especially at this time. For example, the traditional medicines, which make people stronger, their immunity, boost their immunity. It has been there for a long time, and also restore some indigenous seeds, restore some indigenous plants that has been disappeared because of the climate change, as we say. So it's very on one hand, learning from the digital skills, how to deal with the market, how to marketing through digital system. On the other hand, really learn of the livelihood back to the nature, conserve the nature, so we can really live with the new normal. That's one thing that I would like to share with Minu, happening in Indonesia now.
Thank you very much, Nani. Nandita, did you want to say something? I'm just looking at the time. It's now 40 minutes past 1.
No, sir, I'm good. I'm good, Rajbhai.
Anybody?
Can I add for a minute?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to, I think, respond to what Nani has also responded, Minu has asked, and I think that's a very important point, that we have to think of now livelihoods also very differently, and how these online resources and digital platforms are creating new opportunities for people, especially in cases where economy is going to be hit so badly, and in a country like India, this is going to be a huge thing for all of us. And then I think the important question to ask is that what is going to happen to women in this new slump of economy? Will they leave the space for men because whenever there's a crisis, women have to pitch in, or women will come in more numbers and become the major players? I think this is something that we need to watch out and see how technology is going to play around with gender norms. And I just also wanted to quickly respond to what Ola has written, that pandemic has not led to violence. I mean, violence is because of the patriarchal system. But I think what we sort of saying is that how in situations of crisis and distress, these patriarchal norms get reinforced without even being mindful that what we are doing. Somehow these become as if the violence is because everyone is stressed. Earlier there were other reasons. So it is of course is a much deeper problem, but in times of crisis, somehow the other issues become more important, and these issues go on the sidelines, and then we see or respond as the secondary thing. And I think that is why it is important to continuously look from the gender lens even when we are working in times of crisis. And lastly, thank you so much, PRIA and ASPBAE, for inviting Nirantar and me to speak. So really delighted, and so many important things that I have heard, and I wish we will continue these discussions and build these learnings into our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Archana. Thank you very much. Maria, did you want to say any comment?
Well, just to respond to one of the questions, and very briefly, I think, yes, clearly, while online and digital-based learning is the way of the future, we can ignore it. I think we should also muster all the scholarship we have on creativity, on pedagogy, and popular education to optimize as well radio and television options. These other distance technologies, because these are far more accessible to rural communities and poorer communities. I think, and the second message is solidarity. Yes, certainly, Uwe, I think the virus is pushing us into looking more inward into ourselves, into closing our borders. And I think it is through the tradition of civil society organizations that we should challenge this, and that we should continue to see this as a shared shared response across the world, and that's only how we can combat it effectively. And finally, thank you, PRIA, for this wonderful experience.
Rajesh, may I say a final word from my side? Yeah, I just wanted to follow up and also thank PRIA for taking this initiative and encourage you to repeat this because I think we are in a situation where, as I mentioned earlier, we are learning day by day, and the circumstances are changing and developing day by day. And I think we need this kind of crowd intelligence of all of us discussing and reflecting and thinking about the possibility. I personally learned a lot today and got a lot of new ideas and inspiration. And I think this is important, and we have this tool to go beyond our isolation. And I think I would encourage PRIA and ASPBAE to continue on this and to repeat this experience maybe in a short time.
Thank you, Uwe. Thank you very much. Let me just say a few words. Conversation so rich and exciting cannot be summarized in any way. I want to emphasize the significance of the local. I want to re-emphasize the significance of the local. The response in the face of the pandemic came from local. Orders came from national or global. Those were orders, but action took place local. Local institutions, local leaders, local competence, local infrastructure. We must continue to fight and build that. Because local is the first port of call. Local is where response happened, prevention happened, treatment happened, caring happened, nurturing happened. It is local. It is local. With local resources. All the stories. All the stories. Even when money was transferred in the bank account, you couldn't access it. So what? So local. Local is important. The second point, the second message I am taking is, and living in a country like India, you know, some of you living in other countries in Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia countries may not realize. We are living in the belly of the beast of technology. Our technologies are covering the whole world, but we are living in the last 8 weeks. So many private providers of all sorts have captured platforms and platforms, and attention and pockets and pockets and pens of politicians and policymakers in this country. But those private providers will homogenize. They will speak one language, one platform, one input, one text. That doesn't lead to learning. Learning happens contextually, locally, in local idiom, in local language, in local ways. So we must demand public accountability and public investment in this infrastructure, not private. Technology can be developed by the private, but the provision must be public. Only then it will be affordable, only then it will be equitable, and only then it will be locally accountable. The third point I'm picking up from here is that we must invest in developing participatory learning methodologies with the new technology. PRIA has been doing it for the last 10, 11 years in many ways, but we have a long way to go. We preferred blended mode, mixed mode, some online, some face-to-face. Our learning theories tell us that skill learning requires practice. And practice happens in a context. Practice doesn't happen in rarefied environment. So how do we blend this? I am reminded of folk schools and study circles and neighborhood conversation groups where the concept of tutorial, if you may. The lecture can be given by an expert online, but tutorial needs human interaction. How we structure it, how we manage it in the new normal with the distancing norms and others, we'll have to see. But we should not abandon the possibility of face-to-face, because our learning theories and our pedagogical expertise tells us that learning requires some amount of face-to-face. It doesn't matter when it comes, how much it comes, precedes, follows, in between, and that is why the role of the facilitator. Several of you have hinted at this. I am noticing that a large number of teachers at primary, secondary, and even at higher education level in a country like India are highly vulnerable. They have no contract, no tenure, no service guarantee, no benefits. And this imposition, this mad rush for online is going to lead to millions of them getting unemployed. We must come back to respect the contribution of the teacher, but we must prepare the teacher to operate in a new way, but not get rid of the teacher, not eliminate the teacher, because the technologies in the private hand would try to eliminate human interface. So I'm getting this already. There are a number of instructors in even universities in India which are on daily wage almost, and they are worried that now they have no role, because technology will take care of it. And there is this, so on the one hand we have the challenge of equity, of access, of quality for the diverse group of learners in our countries. On the other hand, we have the challenge that we must support, act in solidarity of the teachers and the instructors and the facilitators. Otherwise, we will lose not only expertise, but we lose the inspiration that we require. Human interaction should not be abandoned, come what may, come what may. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, participants. Let us continue this conversation and take it forward in ways that the community of adult educators can push for an important contribution at this juncture. I want to thank our panelists, thank all of you, colleagues in ASPBAE and PRIA, to make this possible.
Thank you, Priya.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you, Priya.
Thank you all.
everybody.
Have a good day
Thank you
and
all.
stay safe and well.
Bye, everyone.